The gentleman from Arizona, Chairman Grijalva, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank Chair Maloney, the House on Oversight, and the Equality Caucus for their work and support for the LGBTQI plus Data Inclusion Act. You know, as we celebrate Pride Month and remember the 53rd anniversary of the Stonewall riots, we recognize the progress, lived experience, and suffering of the LGBTQI plus community. In many ways, our federal government has fallen short on the promise to craft and implement inclusive public policy, in part because we lack the necessary data to address the issues affecting LGBTQI plus community. While some data is currently collected and federal agencies have made progress, far too many LGBTQI plus individuals remain overlooked in many federal data collection efforts. As the Center for American Progress has calculated, more than 5 in 6 LGBT adults cannot be identified by existing questions in non-experimental surveys conducted by the U.S. Census Bureau, such as the American Community Survey and the census, which only accounts for cohabitating same-sex couples. That's why I introduced this legislation, the Inclusion Act, to ensure we have robust and accurate data. The bill would require federal surveys to include data collection on sexual orientation, gender identity, and variations of sex characteristics on a voluntary basis. Again, let me emphasize what the chair emphasized, on a voluntary basis of self-disclosed data. An individual will not be required to disclose this information, nor would this information be used in a manner that would adversely affect any individual. It would ensure that lawmakers and federal agencies have the comprehensive data they need to address the LGBTQI plus issues. We cannot craft policies that remedy the disparities faced by these individuals, particularly people of color, in issues of discrimination, unemployment, health care, housing instability, and more, if we do not have the adequate and correct data. We've seen how the pandemic has impacted many Americans, and we're still learning how the LGBTQI plus community were disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 crisis. This is just one of many areas that our federal government lacks knowledge and how to respond to these issues. In many ways, the tireless work of LGBTQ organizations in gathering this information has provided a better scope of the problems and disparities than the federal government itself. The LGBTQ plus community deserves to be visible and heard so public policy can better reflect their needs. It's critical to close the data gap that often invalidates their lives. Perhaps more importantly, this bill comes at a time when Republican state legislatures across this country have introduced more than 300 anti-LGBTQ bills that target youth and their families. This bill would force those individuals focused on denying rights to LGBTQ individuals to have a reckoning. It will allow the community to be counted and therefore heard. Not only is this bill necessary, it is a top priority of President Biden. During his first day in office, President Biden issued numerous executive orders to strengthen the rights and improve the lives of LGBTQI plus people across this country. He directed all federal agencies that enforce federal laws prohibiting sex discrimination to also prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Just last week, he established a new federal coordinated committee on sexual orientation and gender identity for data, which will lead efforts across agencies to identify opportunities to strengthen this data collection while safeguarding privacy protection and the civil rights of individuals. These are all great initiatives, but we need to go further and codify them into law. This is why this bill is so important. In addition, this bill includes implementation of a process for federal agencies to routinely assess changes needed in the collection of this data. This will provide enough flexibility for federal agencies to use the most effective data collection methods for their agency. We are grateful for the invaluable support and input of more than 200 LGBTQI plus groups and allies that have helped get this legislation to where it is today. It could have not been done without them. This is an important piece of legislation for each and every LGBTQI plus individual in our nation. As a proud ally, I urge my colleagues to support this bill so that all our constituents are seen, heard, and counted. We are not ignoring the current challenges facing Americans. They are not being ignored, as was brought up. Rather, we are treating all Americans equally and being inclusive. And in this great legacy of our nation, one of the great legacies that all of us who take pride in being part of this nation, who take pride in being Americans, one of the great legacies is that this nation offers, under the rule of law, an inalienable right of equality, an inalienable right of access, and for public policy to reflect the needs and respond to the needs of all individuals. That bill takes us one step further in that direction. This bill is not punitive, it's inclusive. This bill is not mean-spirited, it is welcoming. And this bill, above all, is American for all Americans. And with that, Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, thank you for the time, and I yield back.
Gentleman yield.